The Ontario government today introduced Canada's most stringent legislation to help people with disabilities. The long-awaited Ontarians with Disabilities Act is aimed at increasing accessibility, opportunity and independence for the province's estimated 1.6 million disabled. Under the Act, new buildings must have a plan to eliminate physical barriers. Fines for parking in a disabled spot would rise tenfold to a whopping $5,000. The bill would create rules and standards for accessibility to public sector agencies and municipalities across the province. The private sector is being encouraged to meet the same standards.
And with us tonight, the man who has led the lobbying campaign for years now, David Lepofsky, chair of the Ontarians with Disabilities Act Committee. David, you've been emailing me pretty much every other day for the last 5 years, maybe 6 years. Was it worth the wait? Did you get what you've been waiting for?
Unfortunately, not yet. The good news is that last Thursday, the Citizenship Minister unveiled a new vision for people with disabilities in Ontario. And 6.5 years after they took office, that vision is the vision that we've spent 6.5 years getting them to try to adopt. That is, they've announced that their goal, our goal, is to achieve a barrier-free province for all 1.5 million Ontarians with disabilities. Not overnight, but to work towards that objective.
And they've signed on to that.
They've signed on to that vision, and they've said that new legislation's got to be the centerpiece of it. Today, they unveiled for first reading their bill, which we've been advocating for and which Premier Harris promised 6.5 years ago to deliver in his first term. Unfortunately, the bill falls dramatically short of that vision.
Okay, well, let's find out what you like, what you don't like. Start by telling us what you think is in here, beyond the fact they've endorsed your vision. Well, what's in there specifically you like?
Past the rhetoric, I've got to tell you, the thing's 30 pages, I've read it once, so anything I say now is a first cut at this, and there'll be a lot more to say. We're happy to be at the door of the legislature with a bill, any bill, to discuss. This bill recognizes the need for standards to be set, detailed standards to be set for how to remove barriers and for organizations to do plans on how to remove barriers. Where it's hugely deficient is that it doesn't require that the standards be set, it doesn't require that people actually comply with them. And as for the plans that it does say, it really focuses only on the broader public sector right now.
And encourages the private sector to participate.
Well, the encouragement is, I think, more at the level of political rhetoric. For the most part, it doesn't add anything new in terms of obligations on the part of the private sector. With respect to the public sector, it says things like, okay, provincial ministries and municipalities, you've got to develop an access plan. However, it doesn't require that those access plans actually be any good. Doesn't require that they identify all the barriers they have.
And no penalties for failing to comply.
Well, that's the other thing. You could have a gorgeous plan, even if it's a good one, but it doesn't, the Act doesn't impose an enforcement regime on the face of it for people who don't do it. The other thing, the Act says, the minister says as an objective, it's great to have people with disabilities directly involved in this process, and of course we agree, but it sets up a provincial advisory committee of 12 people that the cabinet appoints. No indication of who has input into that other than the usual political appointment process.
Do you want a job on that committee?
I got enough to do right now, thank you.
You don't want a job on that committee?
Not the way it looks right now, I'll tell you.
So if the government came to you and said, we need somebody to chair this advisory body, and you've been a pain in the neck to us for years and years and years, why don't you get in there and help us give some advice?
You know what? This is totally beside the point. We got to make this law to look good. I'm not looking for anything new to do right now. I look to get this law through.
Okay.
But what's really important is it sets up a provincial advisory body. Each municipality is supposed to set up an advisory committee. That's great, but nobody has to follow their advice. Nobody has to listen to them, and nobody has to explain if they don't.
Do you know yet if you have a commitment from the minister to get this bill out to a committee to have some province-wide hearings so you can make these arguments more formally and in a concrete fashion?
Today, after months and months of our pressuring the government, they finally acknowledged that there will be some form of public hearings. But this bill is going to need very substantial amendments. We intend to put them forward. We got a lot of work to do to develop them. We got to move fast. But we need this not just to have your usual, 3 or 4 or 5 days of hearing where the government picks people who can come forward and say what the government wants to hear, and maybe the opposition gets a bit of time to get people in too. This has got to be a broad, inclusive hearing process that enables people who want to have their say to have their say. The Minister of Citizenship, Cam Jackson, said, as I mentioned, he wants people with disabilities to be in the driver's seat. Here's the golden opportunity to do so, which is to have enough hearings with enough lead time so that people can get their thoughts together and make their point.
Okay, I want our viewers to have a really much better understanding of what it is exactly that you want.
Okay,
and
sure.
it goes from everything, I mean, we've talked about this in this program before, where you talk about just putting Braille on elevator buttons, you know, that's a small thing, doesn't cost a lot of money. But there are other bigger things, like, for example, making public transit systems completely accessible to the disabled, which would cost presumably billions. Now, where do you want that? Do you want something short of that? Are you happy with Wheel-Trans? What's the answer to something
Our
like that?
goal is to have barrier-free, good services, facilities, and access to jobs. Some of it can be done quickly, as you mentioned. Some of it can be done over time. For example, the previous provincial government, the NDP, had a policy that required each municipality, if they're going to buy new buses, to make sure they're accessible. We can't throw out the old ones, but when you're buying new ones, buy accessible ones and retrofit over time. In terms of, say, public transit like subway.
Anybody done that?
Well, that was going on for years, and I think it's Alberta, I can't remember, one of the other provinces has done this. This government, when they took power, essentially rescinded that policy, and this bill has, looks like it's got a diluted version of it in it. We've got to look at it more closely. The main difficulty with this, to get back to what we want, we would like to have the barriers that we face identified and eliminated over time. People need to have the time to do it. It's got to be done consistent with reasonable available resources.
For example, name a barrier and how do you want to eliminate
For example, you got a store, it's got one step in front of them. There should be a requirement that they remove it, that they fix it, and that they fix it within a prescribed period of time. Let's give them a good chunk of time so they can do it. It doesn't cost that much, maybe a couple of $100. Net, it's going to make that store more money because it's going to bring in more business. Like, for example, when the government sets about doing restructuring of our healthcare system, running around closing hospitals here and there, we said pass a Disability Act first so that when they decide which hospitals to close and which to leave open, they keep the more accessible ones open and make that a priority. Instead, what happened in Toronto under the government's hospital restructuring? They closed the Wellesley Hospital that was more accessible and shifted the responsibility over to St. Mike's, which is less accessible. This is crazy, and it's the kind of mess that we're trying to see cleaned up now.
Can I ask you just, we're in the broader public sector here at TV Ontario. We're an agency of the Ontario government. And therefore, obviously, we come under the ambit of this bill. How are we doing here? Did you have any trouble getting here tonight or getting into the studio?
Well, me getting into the
honest.
studio, I happen to be blind. It wasn't a big issue. I mean, somebody met me out front and I came in. And I haven't sort of checked this whole place out to see what it's like. But what's more important is we would like to see organizations like this be doing that for themselves and obliged to take steps to implement it, not simply... See, under the government's policy, what would happen is an organization like TV Ontario, if they're scheduled into the Act, and it's a very complicated matrix of regulations, it's not altogether clear who's covered and who's not and when, but what would happen is you could look around and say, you know what, here are the barriers, we're prepared to change, and here are the... And if it's only a few, well, that's all it's going to be. And there's no recourse to say, wait a minute, there's more you could do.
So at the end of the day, you're essentially looking to have whoever it is responsible for enforcing this act be very aggressive about it. The government has to have a very aggressive agency within itself to police this. That's what you want.
We would like a combination of assistance and support for the organizations who are going to do it, but also consequences if you don't. And that's, you've got to have both. It's
like
not
what?
just,
you don't put that, you're a store owner, you don't put that ramp in front of your store as opposed to getting rid of that step. You got 3 years to comply. If you don't comply, what?
Well, the same thing that we do in other areas of the law if a store is not in compliance. What do we do if they're selling substandard food in a restaurant? What do we do if you've got an unsafe situation in a workplace? What do you do if you have toxins all over the place?
Shut them down?
Well, you could go the whole spectrum of getting work orders against them, getting injunctions against them. And in the case of restaurants, what do? If they're not in compliance, sometimes they close them for a day if they have to, or whatever gets us to the point of accomplishing it. I'm willing to gamble that if the legislation is properly drafted, if the requirements are imposed properly and sensibly, people are going to comply. Anyway, the government's claim is that this is in everybody's interest anyway to do it. And if that's the case, then why are they holding back on making these requirements for barrier removal mandatory?
Are the costs associated with enforcing this act or with making this act applicable all over Ontario, A, are they costs that ought to be borne by the public sector or the private sector? Taxpayers, should there be an extra tax on people in order to, I mean, this will cost something. Okay. I know you don't like to give a number. You've been here a few times. You don't like to put a number on it.
Okay, let's roll back a step. The fact of the matter is a lot of these obligations are the law. Much of this is the law right now under the Charter of Rights and the Human Rights Code. So they're supposed to be spending that money right now, but for the most part aren't. So those costs are actually in people's pockets which haven't been spent. Okay, when the Supreme Court of Canada told the Ontario government and all the other provincial governments they had to provide sign language interpreters in hospital emergency wards in '97, the government waited a couple of years and then started funding it. They've actually had that obligation from '85. They just haven't been paying the money. So that's the first thing. This is money that's already supposed to be being spent. As for doing it, though, when you spend the money, you make money. You spend a couple $100 putting down that ramp in front, instead of the one step in front of your store or your restaurant. You're going to make it back in customer sales to people with disabilities, to their families who come and friends who come to the restaurant with you, to people with baby strollers, and so on, to people with shopping carts.
David, I'm literally down to my last 20 seconds here, and I want to ask you that Conservatives obviously are about to be in the middle of a leadership contest. Is it possible the winner may emerge and not share your interest or Cam Jackson's interest in this bill?
All I can say is there's public support for this bill according to the government's poll, or to what we're looking for according to our polls and the government's polls. The government needs to get a little popularity, from what I gather, and I think they would rather see support for this, for what we're proposing, and act on it rather than face the ongoing determination of people with disabilities to get a good law.
Gotcha. David Lepofsky, thanks for visiting us tonight.
Thanks very much.